Hey guys. So we have been starting to talk about acids and bases. And in order to understand a little bit better how acids and bases work and what they are and what they're made up of and how we can recognize them, we have to remember something that we talked about earlier in the year, the idea of ionization. Okay. So when we're talking about ionization, the first thing to remember is that we're talking about solutions. So if you think back to when we were still in school, we talked about solutions. And solutions were anything that was dissolved in a solvent. And our most common solvent is water. So for the purpose of acids and bases, we're actually going to talk about those solutes or those things being dissolved in water. So for our definition, we're going to say that solutions are chemicals dissolved in water. As I'm going through this, it's definitely a good idea to be writing these things down into your notebook or wherever you've been keeping your information. For ChemCom, this is something that we're going to refer back to a number of times over the next couple of days, so it's a good thing to have on hand. So we talked about how we needed to use ionization to understand acids and bases. So if you remember, ionization is a compound breaking down into its ions when it dissolves. Okay. So if you think back to being in class, the most common example we used of this was our NaCl. So remember, NaCl is salt. Okay. And when it's a solid, the Na and the Cl atoms are bonded together. Just like that, they make one molecule. However, if you remember, when we dissolve this into water, those water molecules come and they attract to either the positive side, the Na, or the negative side, the Cl, and they pull those apart. So when NaCl dissolves in water, we end up with Na plus and Cl minus. Okay, so we've looked at that. We looked at that with some other solutions with our copper chloride and our copper sulfate, that blue solid that we used in class, and we looked at the different ways that it dissolved. And we looked at it with some other things as well. So this idea of breaking down into ions when it's dissolved in water is super, super important for understanding acids and bases. Okay, so when we talk about acids and bases, there are two things we need to keep in mind. Acids break down into H plus when they are dissolved in water. Bases have OH minus. Okay, so what do I mean by that? So if we look at a pretty common acid, HCl, we've used this acid already in class. It works the same way that our NaCl molecule did up here. Okay, we've got an H that's attached to a Cl. This is our molecule. When it dissolves in water, it's going to break apart so that we've got an H plus and a Cl minus. Okay. When we look at our acids, we're looking for this H plus. This is what makes our acids do the things that they do. So if you remember to yesterday's video, they showed that acids change the color of the indicator. It's because of this H plus. This is the really important part. Bases do the same thing. So when we look at bases, a really common one is NaOH, sodium hydroxide. It's another chemical that we've already used in class. Okay, it works the same way. We've got an Na atom attached, in this case, to an O and an H. Those are two separate atoms, but they work together like one. So for our purpose, we're going to pretend like this is all one thing. because it is. It's something called a polyatomic. We've talked about them a little bit. When these are dissolved in water, they're also going to break apart or ionize. You're going to have Na plus and OH minus. Okay? Here, this OH minus is what's important for the base. When you saw yesterday on the video, you saw those bases changing the color of the indicator. It's because of the presence of this OH minus that they change colors. Okay? So all we're going to practice today, the only thing you're going to have to worry about is looking at these compounds and breaking them down to either have an H plus or an OH minus. Okay? You want to see something really cool? If you think about water, right? So water is an oxygen attached to two hydrogens. Another way to write water is HOH. When water breaks apart into its ions, it has both parts. So it has the H plus from acids and the OH minus from bases. Okay? The more we learn about acids and bases, the more we're going to find out that water is actually a really, really special chemical. It works in a really special way. It has both acid and base in it. So if you remember yesterday to those things that were neutral, water is an example of that. So because you've got acid and base here, they cancel each other out, and water is essentially like right here in between your acids and your bases. Okay? Check out the next slide. You're going to have some practice on separating these out, and then an understanding check to make sure that you're getting it before we move on to the next part. Have a good weekend.